In this episode, we're going to look at something that feels like business paperwork but directly shapes cybersecurity outcomes in operational technology, OT service agreements, especially the requirements you set during procurement and the protections you lock into a master service agreement, MSA. For brand new learners, contracts can feel far away from the control room, yet many of the biggest OT risks arrive through vendors, integrators, and service providers who need access to systems, handle sensitive information, or deliver software and updates. If the agreement is vague, the organization may discover too late that it cannot require logging, cannot require timely security fixes, cannot restrict remote access, or cannot get support during an incident without paying extra and waiting. If the agreement is strong, it becomes a safety and resilience tool because it defines expectations before the pressure of an outage and before the temptation of shortcuts. The goal is not to turn cybersecurity into legal jargon, but to understand why procurement is a security control and why MSAs must cover certain topics to keep operations stable. By the end, you should be able to explain how OT service agreements reduce risk, what procurement requirements matter most, and what an MSA should address so that vendor support does not quietly become a permanent weak point. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful starting point is to clarify what procurement means in this context, because it is more than buying equipment. Procurement is the process of selecting vendors, negotiating terms, and establishing the rules that govern how products and services will be delivered and supported over time. In OT, the purchase is often only the beginning, because systems live for years, updates occur on the vendor's schedule, and troubleshooting may require remote access and deep expertise. That means the contract you sign becomes part of your security architecture, because it can either enforce good practices or allow risky defaults to persist. Beginners sometimes assume security can be added later, but in vendor relationships, what you can demand later is limited by what you agreed to upfront. If you did not require strong authentication for remote access, you may struggle to enforce it later, especially if the vendor claims it breaks their support model. If you did not require timely notification of vulnerabilities, you may learn about risks only after they become urgent. A strong procurement approach makes security expectations normal, not negotiable exceptions, and that supports operations by reducing unpleasant surprises during critical moments. Now let's define what an MSA is and why it matters. A master service agreement is a contract that sets the general terms under which services will be provided, usually covering multiple projects or work orders over time. It often sits above specific statements of work and defines the baseline rules for things like responsibilities, confidentiality, liability, dispute handling, and service delivery expectations. In OT, the MSA is valuable because it creates consistency. Instead of renegotiating core security and operational expectations every time you need support, the MSA defines the rules once, and then individual projects plug into that foundation. For cybersecurity, this is crucial because risks do not wait for negotiation. When an incident happens, you need clear expectations about how quickly the vendor responds, what access they may use, what evidence they must preserve, and how information is shared. A beginner-friendly way to think of the MSA is that it is the map of the relationship, and if the map is missing important landmarks, teams can get lost exactly when they need clarity most. Procurement requirements are the practical rules you bring into the buying process to ensure that the vendor can operate safely in your environment. These requirements often cover areas like authentication, access control, logging, vulnerability handling, and the secure delivery of software and updates. In OT, remote access is a major focus because many vendors rely on remote support to troubleshoot quickly, and operations often wants that speed. The security requirement is not necessarily to eliminate remote access, but to make it safe and accountable. That includes requiring that access be time-limited, that it use strong authentication, that it be authorized per session, and that it be logged in a way the organization can review. Another procurement requirement involves how the vendor handles credentials and accounts, because shared accounts and default passwords are common legacy patterns that create high risk. A contract can require unique accounts, documented account management procedures, and support for the organization's identity practices when feasible. Beginners should learn that procurement requirements are not theoretical. They are how you turn good security intentions into enforceable vendor behavior. A procurement process also needs to address the reality that vendors often introduce software components, not just hardware, and software creates an ongoing security relationship. That relationship includes how vulnerabilities are discovered, communicated, and fixed. A strong agreement sets expectations for vulnerability disclosure, such as how quickly the vendor must notify the organization of known vulnerabilities that affect delivered products or services. It also sets expectations for remediation, such as providing patches, mitigations, or configuration guidance within reasonable timeframes. In OT, patch timing must respect operational constraints, so the agreement should recognize that updates may need scheduling and testing, but it should still require vendor support for safe updating. It should also clarify what happens when a system becomes end-of-life, meaning it is no longer supported. If the vendor can end support abruptly, the organization may be forced into risky choices. Contracts can require advance notice, transition support, or options for extended support. Beginners should see that lifecycle clarity is part of resilience. Knowing when support ends and what options exist allows the organization to plan upgrades safely instead of being cornered into emergency replacements. Logging and evidence are another major area that MSAs should cover, because during incidents the ability to reconstruct what happened depends on records. In many OT vendor support situations, a vendor may perform troubleshooting actions that affect configurations, access rights, or system behavior. If those actions are not logged in a way the organization can see, the organization may struggle to understand whether an outage was caused by an attacker, a misconfiguration, or a support change. A good agreement clarifies what logging will exist, who owns the logs, how long logs are retained, and how logs can be accessed during investigations. It also clarifies whether vendor tools installed in the environment generate logs, and whether those logs can be exported or reviewed by the organization. Beginners should learn that logs are not only a security feature, they are an operational troubleshooting tool. In OT, where outages can be expensive, having credible logs can reduce downtime by speeding diagnosis and preventing repeated mistakes. Service agreements that ignore logging often create blind spots that are painful during both cyber incidents and ordinary failures. Incident response responsibilities are another critical part of what MSAs must cover, because incidents are where misunderstandings cause the most damage. An agreement should clarify how the vendor is notified, what the vendor must do upon notification, and what level of support is included. It should define response time expectations, escalation paths, and the availability of support outside normal business hours, because OT incidents do not wait for office schedules. It should also clarify how information is shared, including what the vendor will disclose about findings, what evidence they will preserve, and how they will cooperate with investigations. In some situations, the vendor may be a potential source of risk, such as when vendor credentials are misused, so the agreement should allow the organization to request relevant logs and details without unnecessary delay. A beginner misunderstanding is to assume that vendors will naturally cooperate fully, but cooperation is often constrained by policy, liability concerns, and cost unless the contract makes expectations clear. A strong MSA reduces friction in incidents by pre-agreeing on collaboration, which supports faster recovery and more accurate root cause analysis. Data handling and confidentiality are also essential topics in OT service agreements, especially as more OT data flows to cloud services and vendor-managed platforms. Vendors may receive sensitive information such as configuration details, process data, and network diagrams during support. The agreement should define how that data is protected, where it can be stored, who can access it, and how long it is retained. It should also define restrictions on using customer data for other purposes, because data that seems harmless might reveal operational patterns or vulnerabilities. In OT, confidentiality is not only about protecting trade secrets. It is also about limiting information exposure that could enable future attacks. The agreement should also define what happens to data when the relationship ends, including deletion or return. Beginners should see that data governance is part of vendor risk management. If you do not know where your operational data goes, you cannot confidently assess your exposure, and you may face unpleasant surprises during audits or incidents. Another procurement requirement that matters is clarity about subcontractors and supply chain, because vendors often rely on other parties to deliver parts of a solution. A vendor might use a subcontractor for remote monitoring, field service, or specialized engineering. If the agreement does not address subcontractors, the organization might find that unknown third parties have access to sensitive systems or data without the same controls. A strong MSA should require that subcontractors follow the same security expectations, that the vendor remains accountable for subcontractor actions, and that the organization has visibility into who is involved. This supports operations because it reduces the chance of unexpected access and inconsistent procedures. It also supports security because it maintains a consistent trust boundary. Beginners should learn that supply chain risk is not only about counterfeit hardware or hidden vulnerabilities. It is also about who touches your systems and what rules govern their access. Service agreements are one of the few places where you can formalize those rules before the work begins. Accountability and liability are sensitive topics, but they matter because they influence incentives and behavior. If an agreement places all consequences on the customer regardless of vendor negligence, the vendor may have less incentive to invest in strong practices. If an agreement includes clear responsibilities and reasonable accountability, it encourages the vendor to treat security as part of service quality. For OT, where incidents can cause major operational loss, organizations often want clarity about who is responsible for certain failures and what remedies exist. While beginners do not need to become legal experts, they should understand the security principle. Contracts shape incentives, and incentives shape behavior. When accountability is clear, vendors are more likely to follow disciplined processes and to respond promptly. When accountability is vague, problems may be minimized or delayed. A strong agreement also clarifies dispute handling and escalation, which can prevent relationship breakdowns during stressful incidents. In OT, preserving a functional relationship matters because you may need the vendor's expertise to restore safe operations quickly. As we wrap up, building OT service agreements is a cybersecurity activity because procurement requirements and MSA terms determine how vendors can access systems, how vulnerabilities are handled, how incidents are supported, and how evidence is preserved. A strong procurement approach sets expectations for safe remote access, unique accounts, logging visibility, vulnerability notification, remediation support, and lifecycle planning so that the organization is not trapped by end-of-life surprises. A strong MSA provides consistent rules for incident response times, escalation paths, data handling, subcontractor controls, and accountability, which reduces friction and uncertainty when the stakes are high. These agreements support operations by making vendor support predictable, faster, and safer, and they support security by reducing unmanaged access pathways and by ensuring evidence exists when something goes wrong. If you can explain that contracts are part of the security architecture, and that procurement is where many risks are prevented before they exist, you will understand why OT cybersecurity programs treat service agreements as core controls rather than as afterthoughts.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.